keystone of Indian soft power. Now, what do you mean by keystone? Keystone is an architectural term. The keystone of an arch. You're putting stones in an arch. The final stone you put in, it's a wedge stone which keeps the entire arch together, which bears the entire weight, all the stones by themselves. If you remove the keystone, the arch collapses. Ancient Indian ideas are the keystone of Indian soft power, of Indian thought and civilization. And unless we re-inculcate a pride in ancient Indian ideas, we're not going to get anywhere. We are questioning ourselves all the time. We are self-deprecating. Are we successful? Are we doing things right? So let us first understand that this is the most vital aspect of. So as going ahead, we've had so many ideas. We've had a wonderful keynote statement today. We've had brilliant panelists today. Can we think of a group created in VIF, perhaps under the chairmanship of Mr. Gurumurthy himself, who will look at the role of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as relevant to contemporary Indian society and in its historical perspective as well. So we have a brief research period which will bring in the historical perspective and highlight the relevance of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is very essential, because unless we have a researched paper on this, you're not going to have people, it's going to be controversial. People are going to talk about it. They are associating Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam with just Hinduism. It is Bharatiyata. It has come out of the soil. 2000 years ago and more, when the Jews came to India, when the Zoroastrians came to India, was there some philosophical idea? No, it just happened. People came, they got refuge, they were accepted, live and let live. So this whole relevance of this, the keystone relevance of this ancient Indian ideas has to be accepted. I think we should do it and do the research on it. The second aspect linked to the first is I think we need some more research on the relevance of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam globally. I think as Ambassador Ashok Mukherjee mentioned, the whole idea of the United Nations in 1919, League of Nations being created, this was the nations coming together. This was actually Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam recognizing that unless come together, you're going to destroy each other. But even today, this whole idea is relevant in all climate change discussions. It's relevant in the context of conflict resolution. We had Professor Padya who spoke about conflict resolution and the relevance of this idea to it. It's relevant for cross-border terrorism, for implementation of sustainable development goals, for all of these. Unless you recognize the universality of society, live and let live. Don't change everybody, live and let live and do it. I think this is the second aspect of what VIF can do, a very specific research-oriented work. The third aspect, I think, and this has come directly from what was said today by our keynote speaker, Shri Gurumurthy ji, is this dialogue among religions. The proposal which has been put forward by Hans Kung, that unless you have peace among religions, you cannot have peace in the world. So I think this whole concept of dialogue among religions needs to be taken up. Perhaps the VIF can play a seminal role in taking up this dialogue. We had the UN at one point, they did do a dialogue among civilizations, but the question of a dialogue among religions has really never happened. I know I've been in many postings where you do have a dialogue, but you always have the one major religion. I remember it is left out to have a few minor religions, the minority communities getting together, which is not really it. We should remember that in India, the Sufi and Bhakti traditions, how did these emerge? This was the first dialogue among religions, really. Even the acceptance of Zoroastrianism and the Jewish faith in India, the birth of Buddhism and Jainism and Sikhism on this soil, and this is all the concept come out of dialogue. And we must actually understand and appreciate this relevance, that India has a very big role to play in encouraging and maybe leading the dialogue among religions in the world. So let's not hesitate in making this proposal and in fact carrying it forward. Now, when we talk of all this, we have to recognize that unless we ourselves in India, contemporary India, unless we believe that ancient Indian ideas are relevant, we're not going to carry it forward, because we'll be talking here and young children in schools, primary and secondary, do they know about it? Do they hear the phrase Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam until they reach maybe a speech-making stage or something like that? So I think this question of inculcating ancient Indian ideas into educational curriculum is vital. I think this is a role that we have to play. Maybe, make a chapter or two chapters. We can go at primary level, at secondary level, at tertiary level, and even in colleges, in faculties. This concept of ancient Indian ideas is relevant not only in the Department of Philosophy. It should be there in the Department of History, the Department of Literature, and the Department of International Relations. I remember when I was doing my book on Malaysia and I wanted to look at the ancient, what Indian authors have said about ancient Indian interaction with Southeast Asia, going back 2,000, 2,500 years, there was not a single ancient Indian author who had written about it. Even Professor Romila Thapar had not written about it. I even had a discussion with her on this. She had written about India's reaction with Persia, with Turkey, with Western civilization, but nothing about this, about Southeast Asia. And I asked her why. Why didn't you write about this? You left out this entire bit. She said there was no interest in it, so I left it out. And I had to go to institutions in Singapore, find out ancient texts written by actually British scholars 100 years ago on this, on India and Southeast Asia. And then even the British stopped the research on it. And in countries like Malaysia, they didn't allow further excavations in the old temples. So I think that this aspect of bringing this into curriculum and faculties is vital. Now, one is in India, but what about faculties in foreign universities? That's a vital part of ICCR's work. And I remember when I did this Performance Audit Committee chair work, many universities across the world will welcome it, but they want us to suggest a curriculum that they can incorporate, say, in a Department of Philosophy, in a Department of International Relations, or in a department. We keep talking about chairs of Indian studies, but these chairs should not exist independently. They should be incorporated into the ethos of that country, of that university, of that society. Just like when you go to Vilnius today in Lithuania, you find that Sanskrit is essential for them. They don't learn their own language till they have learned Sanskrit. So like that, the fact of ancient Indian ideas being the keystone of so many societies should be there, and we should look at that. And now finally, my final point, that when we come to the implementation of these ideas, then we come to the role of MEA, the role of ICCR, the role of Indian cultural centers abroad. And first of all, MEA has to accept that soft power projection, of which ancient Indian ideas is an intrinsic part, but there are so many other aspects. MEA has to accept soft power projection as a strategic asset of India's foreign policy, as an asset that can be used, can be leveraged to achieve India's foreign policy objectives. This concept has not yet come into MEA. They have not accepted this. Let us recognize it. I wrote about it in my report on the Performance Audit Committee, but this aspect, ICCR said this is MEA's responsibility, and MEA has not yet given a verdict. If at all, they have probably rejected it. So unless MEA accepts that soft power projection is a strategic asset, a strategic dimension, which can be leveraged to access foreign policy objectives. Because today there's a democratization of ideas. Social media means everybody has a vote in accepting or rejecting what you tell them. So India's cultural centers abroad can play a vital role in this, but they need to be staffed with experts. They need to be staffed with people who can talk about it, who know about it, who can go into the universities and talk about it. Just like I saw when we went on these visits that many of the yoga teachers first posted after Ashok had International Yoga Day accepted. They were PhDs in yoga studies. And these PhDs in yoga studies were welcomed by foreign universities. They were welcome to come there and give talks on Indian yoga, talk about the philosophy of yoga, talked about the spirituality and physicality of yoga. And it was welcomed. It had a huge resonance. But unless you have these kind of experts who have their own PhD degrees and their own expertise to talk about these things, they are not accepted. You can't expect a generalist to be accepted in a university. And universities, why do I talk about them again and again? Because university is where the youth are. If you want the future to be with Indian ideas, unless you influence the youth, they're not going to go out and talk about India. You have, even in a country like Russia, where we've had the most intensive relations. If you go to your Russian university today, very few of them have Indian studies as part of their core curriculum. Doesn't matter what faculty. So the youngsters today and our old friends, they look, you know, the people who are getting out of university today, no matter whether it's business studies or cultural studies or international relations studies, they don't know about India. So this is a task that MEA has to do. I'm sure we'll get a very good response from our panelists. And I will begin with our very first panelist, which is Ambassador Suresh Goyal, who has, of course, been DG ICCR for many years. You've all got the book, so I know that there's not much time, but I know that he's had tremendous expertise, and he has actually been a practitioner and also a leader of the thought processes of soft power projection. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Is it on? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Since the time is very limited, let me basically come down to my understanding of what Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is enough has been said by the previous speakers in the panel today and yesterday. But essentially, there are two ideas to my mind in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. If we are going to say the world is a family, there are two components. One is the members of the family, and the other is the aggregate of those members as a family. And they're both equally important in terms of relationship between the individual and the aggregate. And that is where it actually comes that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is not just a kind of a unilateral or monolithic process. It is a process of dialogue or understanding between the members of the family to make the whole family environment conducive to the conduct of relationships and the affairs and in a kind of a peaceful, stable environment, despite the differences of opinions. When we talk about Aham Brahmasmi Tattvamasi, we are equating. We are not just basically saying that we are both same, but we are equating two entities in terms of the validity of their ideas and their existence. Similarly, when we talk about Ekam Satya Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, we are talking about inclusion and not excluding any different ideas. The truth is not a unidimensional process, and therefore the culture or thought process is not unidimensional. My thinking can be as valid as yours is till we are prepared to accommodate. Uh, to my mind, uh, I will not really talk in terms of the projection of soft power, but cultural diplomacy. And therefore, to my mind, what we need to look at Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is generate cultural ideas which can be used for dialogue between two different societies. That is what I believe our culture is about. That is what I believe our own civilization is about. India, after all, if we recall, you talked about Bhartiyata. Bhartiyata is not just one or the other. Bhartiyata is basically a kind of a cultural concept where the territories are dissolved into the idea of a cultural uh, framework within which we all exist. And therefore, rather than talking about the territorial boundaries, talking about the areas and the space, we talk about we belong to Bharat because we are Bharatiya and we belong to the civilization of Aryavrata, which defined us as those kind of cultural people. Speaking on that basis, I would say that we should really use culture and all the instruments of what you say soft power. And in that soft power, I would talk about our ideas, Vedanta, Upanishads. I would talk about the plurality of our own culture. I would talk about our youth. I would talk about our innovation. Innovation, to my mind, is not just technological. Innovation, to my mind, is cultural. If we are able to think out of the box, that is because of our culture that we are not limited to just basically what we are taught, but we can question and we can think out of the box. So those ideas, being able to think out of box, innovation, creativity, we must use all these, including the ancient ideas, towards creating that platform where two societies, and now when I talk about the two societies, I mean the Indian society and the other societies, the nations, can talk to each other on the basis of that equality of uh, footing, that we are both equal and therefore we can talk to each other. Clearly, in this process of dialogue, the acceptance of the need to talk is inherent. If the one side does not feel that there is a need to talk, how much of an effort we make, eventually there will be a kind of a block somewhere. And then, of course, the cultural diplomacy has to yield to the other kinds of uh, instruments to essentially, but it also basically means that we are talking in terms of our own uh, belief, conviction of what we are about. And therefore, it has to be a kind of a dignity, understanding that we remain convinced of our ideas and we know that you have valid ideas. So let us see where we can actually come to the same. Uh, in ICCR, I will not talk about in detail about the various things we did, but I distinctly recall that one event we did for the India ASEAN Summit in 2012 actually told me the importance of this cultural intermingling or the cultural dialogue. When we did this event, we had 10 groups from Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN countries, matched by the 10 groups from India, and we had them in 1 hour program. And if you look at the audio visual of that program, it would be difficult to say where the Indian culture and the ASEAN cultures ended or they started. They all looked same. And at the end of it, all the presidents and the prime minister who were there, they came to us and said that this is what we actually want to show how India and Southeast Asian countries have been part of the same cultural paradigm. So I think that is the success of the cultural diplomacy. I'll just take 2 minutes now, really not counting on various things that we did at that time, but two most important mechanisms that we have, and I think have not been fully utilized in terms of promoting India's cultural dialogue are the chairs and the cultural centers. Now, the chairs, they started with the idea of positioning in the universities in the way of a collaborative arrangements. And they were supposed to work within the space of the universities, not just as Indian faculty, but within the ethos of those universities. But those Indian chairs would be positioned in the universities in a collaborative arrangements and gradually over time would become the hub or the incubators of the Indian studies. That unfortunately did not happen. The initiative, depending on the initiative of the professor himself or herself, there were good outcome, there were mediocre outcome, but to develop those Indian chairs into a kind of a willing and voluntary mechanism where Indian professor and those international students could talk to each other and work on in India, work on a kind of interactive process to promote that dialogue. That didn't happen. I think we need to encourage that. This can be done through seminars, conferences, research papers, but most of all, engagement. Number two, cultural centers. Cultural centers were designed, to my mind, not just as the places to project India's soft power. I That could have been done by a person positioned in the Indian embassy. A group has gone there. You talk to the local organizations, do the performances, or you organize an Indian seminar or conferences. To my mind, and I think there are some cultural centers which are working very well in that direction. The cultural centers were expected to be a true model of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Yes, I will take less than 1 minute. They were they were expected to be actually the true models of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, where the Indian culture and the culture of the host country could come together into that format of talking to each other, doing things which are collaborative in nature, conferences, which could host exhibitions from the artists of that country, which could actually bring the Indian artists and the foreign artists together into those collaborative things. Most of the Indian cultural centers now seem to have become the space for projecting Indian culture, or at the best, really, to meet the needs of the diaspora. These two are important activities, but the need, the paramount need for them to give space to the culture of the host countries, to host personalities, and develop the dialogue must be kept in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Suresh. That was very detailed and excellent. And I think your focus on Bhartiyata is good. The methodology of dialogue that you have described is excellent. Acceptance of equality and acceptance of the need to talk, except that sometimes politics comes into it and that becomes a reason for saying no. What you said about chairs is very important because it is true that unless you bring in the element of support for the culture and the dialogue with culture, it's not there. And what you said about the role of the Indian cultural centers, many of these issues were covered in my report, and that was good. So thank you. I'd like to now invite Mr. Ashok Pradhan, whom I've known for many, many decades, but he's the only IS person in this entire den of MEA people. And he's done tremendously wonderful work as director of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, whom we all know and interact with whenever we travel abroad. And I think the 2 volumes that they have brought out, the Bharatiya Vidya Sar, parts 1 and 2, and he's got it accepted as a program, as a study program on under sector of Sanskriti, but only in the AICTE and not in the broad-based CBSE and other curriculum, and certainly not yet in the college faculty. So I'm sure he's working on it. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much for asking to be present here as a representative of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. Because as myself, I'm not really competent to be dealing with these subjects. Let me first start by congratulating the Vivekananda Foundation that today Gandhi Peace Prize has been given to the Vivekananda Society in Chennai. That's a great thing. This should have happened long back, but it has happened today. I think it's the right time to feel proud about it, and I congratulate you once again on that. Now, I've heard part of proceedings. The Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam has been talked about by many people, and we have been talking about, but before I go to what I want to say about the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, what is done, I'd like to say the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is originally comes from Rigveda. Yatra Vishwam Bhavati Eknidam. The whole world is a nest for everybody. That is in the Rigveda. Of course, it came out in the Hitopadesh. And the second time it came out was what you call it then? Hitopadesh or Panchatantra, which is the stories which are advice for your hit, for your blessings, which is also very much relevant to the diplomacy today. Because that I'll talk a little later. But what I want to say is the sense of India's culture, which should be taken up, is of course Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And here, let us go back to our history, the joint family. What was the concept of joint family? One person who is earned, he is not earning for himself. He is earning for the entire family. And he takes care of everybody. Is that the concept we can take forward to the entire world? That we are a part of the same family. And that the concern, benefit, and welfare of everyone is our own responsibility. That is what is very, very important. The other part which was said above, Sarv Dharma Samabhav. All religions should be respected. But I would like to say that this word should be changed to Sarva Dharma Sadbhav, not Samabhav. Samabhav is a secularistic aspect. Sadbhav is what is India's cultural aspect when it comes to Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is not, Samabhav is not correct. Sadbhav is what it should be, which should take you forward. And that is another concept of essence of Asian culture which should be implemented. The third, everyone knows, Sarve Bhantu Sikhna Sarvitindra Rabhaya. That is also very, very important. Then Bhagavad Gita says, Amritasya Putra. All those we are here, they are part of the same ultimate reality, whatever name you may give. Is so we have the equality, we have to have the equality because we are the sons. Not sons is not only generic, it is all those who are living beings are Amritasya Putra. Then the other thing which comes to my mind is that these, and there are many other things, very few, and some have been some aspects have already been covered. But I would only like to say now a few words what Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan has been doing in this respect. Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan set up in 1938 has been promoting Sanskrit and Sanskriti for the last 80 years. And one of the speakers talked about the education system. Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan promotes Sanskriti through education. We have more than 85 schools in India, 10 schools abroad, centers, more than 100 centers in India, a few centers abroad, New York, London, Sydney, and many other places promoting this aspect. Now, what we do in the schools? What we do in the schools is basically promoting this aspect that, I mean, I would say some of you would come in the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan Delhi and see in the schools what we have done. All this Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Sadbhav is all in the schools, it's always there. So right from the childhood, the children read these things. And they don't understand when they are in the class 4, 5, 6, but it gets into their अंतरात्मा में चला जाता है। और फिर जब वो बड़े होते हैं तो उस वक्त जब कोई भी समस्या सामने आती है, तो then it comes back to their mind what it is. मातृवत परदेशु परदेशु लोष्टवत्. Now this is, people don't understand what it means. If it is in your mind, the type of crimes which are taking against the women will certainly not perhaps do. There is another aspect is Sanyam and Niyam, which we try to teach our children. Sanyam is what? If you are from inside, you don't do something wrong, then you don't need the Niyam. Yesterday I think somebody said Sanyam and Niyam. If you don't do Sanyam, then the Niyam is necessary, then the law is required. Otherwise, if Atmik, your Antaral itself, is so, has the attitude of not doing things wrong, which are morally, ethically wrong, perhaps you don't need the law. This is what is the essence of this of our culture. Now, since the time is very little, I would only say what we can do. All these aspects of ancient Indian culture need to be promoted through education, through ICCR units, through Jawaharlal Nehru centers abroad, from there many other places, and then that India's what you call cultural presentation all over the world. All that is okay. But what is the key? Which, first of all, where there is no dispute, where there is no conflict, is one, the environment. And environment, we do not know that in the Atharva Veda, Rishi Atharva talked about Prithvi Sukta. The first mantra itself is talk of the global aspect of human being and how everything, water, Agni, the what you call a fire, everything, all the 5 elements we are talking, Chiti, Jal, Pava, Gavan, Samira, all these things are taken care of in the Prithvi Sukta. Prithvi Sukta is also, they say it is a mother. And when you read through it, if you read some of the mantras, you will say what Bankim Chatterjee said. Vande Mataram, Sujlam, Saflam, Malaya Shitalam. This is already there in the Atharva Veda. So this is also an essence that Atharva Veda talks about the Prithvi Sukta, which has a number of mantras. Most of the mantras relate to them. And therefore, this is another aspect which should be brought out. And I have a lot of things to say about this, but I will not say because the time is limited. Therefore, this is what it is. Then I'll also go to this. Isha Vastavidam Sarvam Yatkam Tena Taktina Bhanjita Magrasa Kasya. What it is say? It says, I'll refer only to what is important. Thou should only enjoy by giving it up and not covet not the possession of any other man. So the question is, this is basically today's utilitarianism. Today's consumerism is a key destroyer of our nature and environment. Sustainable development, a balance between materialism, what you require, and nature. This is the new word which has come from the Western world. But look at the essence of India's approach, right from the Vedic time. The nature is your mother. If there is no water, there is no Agni, there is no energy, there is no Vanaspati, how do we live? And then you must take care of it. Tena taktena bhanjita. This is what it is. That you must take care of the mother, earth, which we say in our family, a mother who has brought you up, when she is in a bad shape or this thing, you must take. So this is basically concept which must go, they can go right from the child, right from the student, the school to the top level. And as somebody said, unless it goes into the minds of the school children, it has really no meaning. By the time people reach the graduation level, it is all they have, their mentality is already set up, and nothing more can be done about it. So this is another aspect. Environment is one, which is very, very important. Then we have to talk about ethics and Ayurveda, astrophysics, all this we are doing it. Yoga is already been said. I'm not covering those ideas which are already there. But this is what I would like to say, that Bharatiya Vidya is trying to do this. Now the question is, application. How do you apply these things? Application will come because now today, I'm sorry I'm saying something which may not be very welcome. What happens? There is a conference. There is a number of dialogue that is get printed. That's the end. This society has moved over to form and left the substance. So what is important is that whatever we discuss, whatever we do, has to be implemented. It has to be substantially activated. Otherwise, it is really no meaning. Now the question is, my mind comes to from the Turbat side to the Panchsheel. Panditji took it up in 1954, the Chawan Lai, and it was based on our own principles. What happened? Their clause says it was, section 6 of the agreement said that is only for 8 years. And then, what did China do to us? The question is, I'm moving to the other part of the diplomacy. The common sense is that you must deal with an individual with a common sense. Yesterday, day before yesterday, our Kapil Kapoor ji had talked about Uttar I will not go to that. But what does it mean? Those 4 Brahmins, the 4th one who climbed the tree to the tree and was saved from the lion, that's a common sense. So when you deal with a country, with an individual, you should have common sense how to deal with it. And that is why I will only like to say that there are a few things more which need to be noted in this context. And those things are our own principles. Shathe Shadyam Samacharat, Sam Dam Danda Bhed. These are part of practical aspect of diplomacy, even of man-to-man relationship. And while we talk about all these ancient concepts, we must take note of the common sense. What is there in Shanti Parama? What is there in Vidur Niti? What is Kautilya Arthashastras? What is Shukra Niti? What is Bhartraji Niti Shatak? These are the things which also be taken care of. And unless they are taken into practice, well, we'll continue to do what we do. Sorry if I've said something which is not acceptable. But the last thing I will say, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan has Sarv Dharma Prarthana, which we have taken off from 7 religions which are in this country, which our peace and what you call ambassador have said about that all religions will be taken care of. The best out of them will be taken care of to be able to move forward, to bring about the sense of universality and acceptability to each other. We have brought about a CD on this side. I'm presenting it to the VIF today for them to look at it and see. This is the essence of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. That is what I'm trying to do. I'm thankful to you for calling me here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashokji. You have given us a wonderful idea of the work you're doing and wonderful ideas as well. Sarva Dharma Sambhav or Sarva Dharma Sadbhav. That's an idea to be thought about, and to focus on certain areas like the environment. I think that's an excellent idea. And to bring out all the texts in the ancient Indian texts that have references to the environment, and the focus on ethics as well is quite a big contribution that India can make. Thank you. I now invite Ambassador Ashok Sajanwar to give us his presentation. He is currently president of the Institute of Global Studies and with the ORF, and has been ambassador in many countries. I request you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I know since time is limited and I don't want to stand between you and the lunch, I'll just flag 3 or 4 points. The first one is, and this is in terms of thoughts or suggestions, in terms of what VIF could do, could take it forward, or some of the other institutions. You know, it has been mentioned today, as also it was mentioned earlier yesterday. It was mentioned today as also yesterday that India has really been living the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam ethos and philosophy. And of course, mention has been made, I think, even in the speech by Swami Vivekananda in 1893. He'd also mentioned about how the Jews have come into India, how Zoroastrians have come to India. I think what is really, in addition to all that piecemeal information that is available, what is also needed is to have a comprehensive account of how India has provided refuge to all persecuted communities, religions, ethnicities from all over the world at all times. I know Priyanka ji mentioned about what he's done as far as Banaras is concerned. I'm sure there must be lots of things that have been done as far as Kerala is concerned. But I think as far as the whole country is concerned, and going from antiquity in terms of historicity, if you look at the first wave, when we talk about the Jews only, the first wave came after the first temple of Solomon was destroyed in 587 BC. That is what the account is. And the second wave came in the first century AD, when you had the second temple that was destroyed. And then the third wave came of the Sephardic Jews in about 15th century after the Alhambra decree was enunciated. And this was in the 15th century when there was Inquisition in Spain and in Portugal. Now, these Jews came and they settled on the Malabar coast, and they have been there. But the other point that is to be noted is that it's not only that area that has accommodated the Jews. We have spoken about this wonderful synagogue that I'm sure many of us have gone and seen. There are just about, four, five, six families, I think, at last count that were there, and they have gone out of India not because there is any sense or any trace of anti-Semitism there, but because of they have got their own homeland after 1948, and because of better opportunities, economic opportunities, they have gone there. The point I want to make is that when the Jews came either on the Malabar coast or the Bnei Israeli who came, they are considered to be one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and their ship was went under off the coast of Konkan. They came. Now they are settled in Mumbai. If you look around, the contribution that they have made as far as the economic activity and intellectual activity in Bombay is concerned, or in Kolkata is concerned, whether it is the Sassoon Docks or the Sassoon Library or the Sassoon Synagogue, across the board, Sassoon Reading Room, you have their presence there. The point I'm making is also you go to Surat, you will also be able to find you'll be able to find instance there. The point I'm making is that across centuries, across millennia, people from outside have come who have been persecuted. They have come not to one area in India, but they have come to several areas: Malabar, Surat, Mumbai, Kolkata, uh, Chennai, and they have been welcomed and they have been assimilated and absorbed in those societies. So it is an ethos that is not specific only to a particular place or a particular time. The whole of India has truly welcomed these people who have come. You look at Christianity. Christianity came here in 52 AD when St. Thomas landed off the coast of Kerala around Calicut. Now, this was 1,000 years before Christianity came to North Europe, Sweden, where I was posted, or even before St. Paul had reached Rome in 80 AD. So, India has been, whether it is to in terms of spreading the gospel or in terms of Zoroastrians, we've mentioned, and I'm sure everyone, or maybe most of us here, are aware of the Kissa Sanjan when when these people came from Sinjan near Merv in Turkmenistan, and how the king of the Raja of Gujarat, he said, "I have no space here in my land to accommodate you," and he asked one of his courtiers to bring a glass of milk brimful, say no space, and they added 2 spoons of sugar and they mixed it and they said, "We are not going to take any space, we are just going to add sweetness to your," and that is what they have done. So you look at it, whether it is even in terms of acceptance and celebration, not only acceptance but celebration, in terms of the minority communities, for instance, of Islam, whether it is the
Ahmadiyyas, it is the Bohras, it is the Baha'is. You go to any of the Muslim countries, they are persecuted there. They are not considered to be Islamic. They are not considered to be Muslim. Not in India. So I think what we really need to do is have a comprehensive account of how, and of course, in the modern time, whether it is the Tibetans who have come, they have been received here, and I don't see any sort of uh, antipathy towards them. They have been accommodated, they have been welcomed. So, one is that point that what it could be VIF or any of the other interested institutions could take it up. The second is, when we are talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, I think we should project it as the totality of Indian thought, because what comes out when we are talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that it is a soft approach, if it's a soft power, and that is all that we are trying to project. But I think if we are taking it in the totality of the Indian thought, for instance, what Mahatma Gandhi, when he was thrown out in 1893 off the train in St. Petersburg, not St. Petersburg. And then he thought, what should his response be? This is what is he has mentioned in his My Experiments with Truth. What should his response be? Should he go back? After all, he was a young man of 24 years. It was dark, it was cold. He's thrown out onto the platform. He doesn't know no one at all. And then he says what came to his aid was the teachings of Gita. And what does Gita tell you? Gita tells you that when you are faced with oppression, when you are faced with injustice, you have no other option but to resist. So when you are talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the whole world is a family, this is also an integral part, that when there is oppression, your Indian philosophy, Bharati philosophy tells you to reject that, to act against it. And that is what he did. It was not that he was a particularly brave man. He has written in his autobiography that he was afraid of darkness, he was afraid. Okay. He was afraid of darkness, he was afraid of spiders, and he was afraid of ghosts and other things. He's not a particularly brave man in that sense. But it is the teachings, and Gita later on became his daily encyclopedia. So I think when we are projecting Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, it should have all the other elements of Indian thinking, Indian philosophy. One point, we were talking yesterday about hierarchies, and we said, as far as the Chinese system is concerned, there it is the hierarchy of authority. In Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam also, there is a hierarchy, because, it's not that everyone is equal. After all, in a family, one is a father, one is a mother, one is siblings, etc. They have different roles, but they are all motivated by love, affection, compassion, consideration, and support. And I think that is another aspect that we could possibly bring into whatever there's been mentioned in this book as to how do the other religions. I think all the four religions that have been born here, I've spoken about the religions that have been persecuted in other countries, and they've come to India, and they have been adopted, and they have been welcomed, they have been cherished. But other Indian religions, they have their philosophical strands which move from one to the other. The concept of non-violence, it is there in all the religions. Chandragupta Maurya, Ashoka's grandfather, he took up Jainism. Ashoka himself, he got converted to Buddhism. When you have Nanak coming in the 15th century, he also makes the same thing. Aval Allah Noor Upaya Kudarat ke sab bande, ek noor se sab jag upja, kaun bhale kaun mande. So everything, unity, egalitarianism, I think it informs each and every religion and philosophical thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think you've given us a lot of details and food for thought about what Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means for each of us and for people from different religions, and how we should all be motivated by love and compassion for each other. Now, our final speaker is Ms. Namrata Kumar. She is currently working as the Deputy Director General in the Indian Council for Cultural Relations, and she has been in the Foreign Service for almost 2 decades and has worked in many places in Cairo, Paris, and Abu Dhabi, and in many areas of work. You have the floor.
Thank you, ma'am. Very firstly, I just want to mention that ICCR is extremely pleased to collaborate with Vivekananda International Foundation in organizing this very important seminar, which is the topic that is very, very relevant and needed this kind of deliberations. So it's indeed a great pleasure. I am here amongst all my seniors. I think I'm the youngest panelist and also in the amongst all the speakers. Two of my panelists have led ICCR as DG ICCRs, and they have contributed immensely in, based on which today ICCR is where it is. Uh, Coming to the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and its relevance, I will try and talk mostly in the context of how it can be used as a practitioner, as diplomats overseas, and in the present context. So when we talk about the present context, we are actually talking about the globalized world where the boundaries are diffused. No more physical boundaries are so very much coming in between the interaction of people around, where the media is very active, especially the social media. So interaction between the people of different countries is no longer limited. Everything is very diffused. That is the context. And cultural, I would also say that we are also now culturally globalized when the boundaries have really become thin. Another aspect of another point about the context is about the public diplomacy. More and more, the conduct of international relations has become uh, more public, and public has become more involved in foreign affairs. So the role of people has become really very important when it comes to foreign affairs. It is no longer limited to the states and the leaders talking and having negotiations and dialogue between each other, but role of public has become very, very prominent. And that is another point of the context. So when the context is changed, shouldn't our strategies also change when we talk about projecting our soft power? And when we are talking about changing our strategies, at that point, when we are talking about bringing in the ancient Indian wisdom, how does it fit in this context, which is a contemporary context, modern context, and in the modern context, we are talking about the ancient concepts, ancient wisdom. Uh, and here I would like to also stress on the fact that before we go and convince people overseas, we need to be ourselves convinced, because each time we bring this debate about using ancient wisdom to promote our country overseas, first of all, we get bombarded by the arguments within the country saying that, oh, you guys are only fixated in the ancient times. Hey, please come out of it. So, have we been able to convince our own people? So, everything begins at home first and then probably overseas. Maybe the fact is that people overseas are more convinced than people here. So the work has to be done two ways. Anyway, coming back to the international platform, and why are we using the ancient wisdom to promote India's soft power? Because yes, it is damn relevant. It's very, very relevant. Here, I would like to actually mention about the fact that reality that surrounds us is not merely a product of purely material forces, which we have been talking about when we talk about soft power diplomacy and hard power. So it's essentially a product of our shared perceptions, beliefs, values, ideas, and understandings. And socially constructed realities are very powerful structures that can have real consequences on the minds of the people. The socially constructed ideas, once created, are also very difficult to change. So that is what we are doing at the moment. We are actually embracing this constructivism approach when we are using our ancient wisdom. I would not use, I would like to correct my word use. We are reinterpreting, and why not if it is relevant? So we are reinterpreting our ancient wisdom in the present context, and if we have to, um, yes, we should. So When it comes to foreign policy objectives, every nation's objectives, including India's, is to primarily project its national interests. And national interest means its people's interest. Uh, when we talk about this, herein again, the relevance of the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam comes in, because when we are talking about our interests, we are not just talking about our interests, we are talking about the interest of people all over the world. And those are the shared values, those are about growing together. When we talk about national interest, the most important national interest, and there is definitely a hierarchy. The most important national interest is security, but is security limited only to its security of national security to be protected by defense strategies and defense tools? No, now the definition of security has also gone beyond defense securities, and that includes economic security, energy security, food security, environmental security. Where, again, the changed context. So when the definition of security has expanded, here is the role for India. In past 4 years, we have actually understood the fact that what we've been doing all this while, when we were dealing with foreign policy or promotion of soft power, we were actually just promoting the manifested aspect of our culture in the form of dance, music, theater, films, etc. But here is what actually we have to do. We have to project our shared wisdom, which will bring the collective good. I will now just come to some examples which, from the practitioner's point of view, will demonstrate how we have actually implemented 1 minute. In 1 minute, 4 examples. Uh, Ambassador Mukherjee already mentioned about IDY. I just want to mention that the outcome of IDY, two outcomes, important outcomes of IDY, was that Saudi Arabia actually inducted yoga in its as identified yoga as its national sport. So its Ministry of Sport has actually made it mandatory for everybody to do yoga. That is the country in the Gulf, a Muslim country. Another outcome was the establishment of India-China Yoga College in China, wherein we are producing the professors and curriculum for yoga. Second example is the International Solar Alliance. Now, International Solar Alliance is directly connected with the SDGs, which UN has laid out. There are 17 SDGs, and these SDGs are relevant to all the countries. National Solar Alliance is an example which was as India's initiative, and more than 121 countries came together to work together on how to use solar energy for a collective good. Third example is how, of course, Mahatma Gandhi and his ideas and his philosophies, which are not just relevant to India but all over. And I just want to mention about what Obama mentioned when he came in 2010 and delivered a speech in Indian Parliament, and he said he was very mindful that he was very mindful to recognize the fact that he might not be standing before the Indian Parliament as a US president had it not been for Gandhiji. So that speaks about our strengths. Our strengths lie in our ancient wisdom, which is a collective wisdom which has survived throughout. And like Chair mentioned right in the beginning, it was never a disconnect between ancient and modern India. It was a continuum. It continued. That's why we survived. Last example is then when we celebrate IDY all over the world, people are surprised to see that the foreign service, so small in size, how can they manage this large scale activity all over the world? This is our strength, that we can manage things efficiently. Jugaad is not unnecessarily studied in the universities overseas. That is our strength. China is all over. They are shoving money. They are spreading Confucius Center all over. Yet people are intimidated. With us, going anywhere, people are not intimidated. They want to be with us. They want to grow with us. So our philosophy is grow together, be together. And I think in that sense, all our ancient wisdom is very, very relevant. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've given excellent examples and focused on the thought processes behind Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Now we've come to the end of the panel. There were specific suggestions from each of the speakers, and I'd given some in the morning. If you like, we can summarize these and give them to Arvind, if you like, to put them all together in one place. But are there any comments from the audience? Any suggestions? Any points to be added? Yes, one question right there at the back.
Good afternoon, ma'am. We talked about soft power diplomacy. And when we talk about the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and when we correlate this philosophy in today's situation, is India really ready to take the role of global leadership? We have seen that after the appointment of Donald Trump as a president and pre-exit, the world order is really changing very fast. And when we talk about the role of India, India has all potential to create new global order, because we are in very few country which has very good relationships with two superpower like Russia and USA.
Please be a little brief. There'll be other
Okay.
questions. Yes.
If the crisis like Syria comes in future, can India play important role in resolving this kind of issue? Because we have a soft power as well as hard power.
Well, I think playing a role, I'll stretch my panelists to have me answer, but playing a role in such crisis situations is a factor of two things. First of all, your own confidence. Do you have the confidence? And we will have the confidence if we believe in ourselves, if we believe in our history, if we believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And if we have the confidence, we can play the role. Secondly, the world has to recognize that India is a global leader. And they have to recognize that, yes, to get lasting solutions, to get solutions which are inclusive and which can work in the future, country like India will always have good ideas and a good leadership role to play. I think this is what we are trying to achieve now by the soft power projection, by projecting, telling the world that we have it in us. We can do it. And we have shown, I think, in the implementation of international review, so many other ideas we have shown. Now, even in Afghanistan, now more and more India is being included. So I think these are two factors necessary for getting into being involved. Don't have any doubts. But when you don't have doubts, also build on your own strengths. And our strength is our civilizational past, our soft power. I think there's anything else to be added from? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes, Satish. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's okay. I wanted to make 3 quick points. First, I wanted to underline what Ashok had just mentioned in his presentation, that Indian culture has considerable traction. And I had seen this in my own experience, and most of us in the Foreign Service has seen it, that there is great acceptance of this the world over. And I think that India has lived this and demonstrated it. And I think, as Ms. Kumar just mentioned, we are seen as a non-threatening power. In fact, even in our nuclear doctrine, if you look at it, the Pacific elements of it come out. But of course, soft power is meaningless without hard power and the diplomacy to match it. Now, I think the point was made by you, Veena, and by Mr. Ashok Pradhan, and even by Namrata, I think, that really we have to apart from practicing it, bring up our generations at home to do this. And this point, I think, is well taken, and certainly VIF will push this through, that it becomes a part of the curriculum. And that's not new. In fact, way back in 2001, at the behest of the then NSCS, this point was made. It was accepted by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Committee on Security that Indianness, etc., should be taught in schools and colleges, made a part of the curriculum. It wasn't. But I think this, at least now, should be done and is imperative. I think the most important thing in promoting the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is really how do we get the world to accept it. And that is important because there are hegemonic powers. We have problems with them, others have problems with them. And this is really the work largely backed by think tanks and so on of the Ministry of External Affairs. The point that you made is how do we get the widest possible acceptance of this concept, even amongst nations which don't accept it and go contrary to it. That is the ultimate goal. And I think that's the work that is cut out. I just also wanted to mention what our friend here had spoken about, that in promoting this concept, we need to see which are other cultures which practice this concept so that they can also be taken in within us in projection of it. Thanks, Veena.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for those valuable ideas. I think mostly, first of all, that hard power by itself has proved itself not to be enough. We'll just destroy ourselves many times over. So now we are trying to get the plus. We have to, hard power is going to be there. You're not going to weaken on that front at all, but you're trying to get the plus that will not only get us the international recognition, but also the place. And as far as hegemony is concerned, I think one important point for us is that in India's neighborhood, we are seen as a hegemonic power. And we're described as the hegemonic power and also vilified as the hegemonic power. So I think the importance of soft power projection in India's neighborhood is vital. And unless we do that, I think, we just will not get that neighborhood first foreign policy into practice. So I think that is where it is most important. I think, yes, please, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say Dharm Yudh is as much a part of the Indian ethos as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is.
Yeah. I think we can end now. Azad, you think we can end now and go for lunch? Oh, yes, please. Yes, thank you.
I know it's half an hour beyond lunch. I hope the dinners have not started. But I think some excellent points have come out, and I don't want to summarize them. And we'll take, as we sort of list and go through the records, we'll try and get these points on board. But it's the last point which Mr. Satish Chandra mentioned. That was what inspired us to do this seminar. As to at the global level, how do we get these things recognized and how do we engage with others? Of course, the other point that we must begin at home, that is very much so. So the issue of getting it on our curriculum, doing comprehensive compendiums, etc., researches and all that should go on at the same time. So the effort abroad has to be backed by the work that we do here. So I would request, I think the point was made by you that we should set up a group, etc. We will certainly look into that, because just to take this forward. But I would also suggest that the institutions that who are here, they should also promote and do this in their own ways. And maybe we can come together, maybe periodically, to take stock of what is happening. But as we know, as in the think tanks, we all require backings and resources, etc. And I'm thankful to the ICCR and the ICPR who came together to help us with this seminar. And I do hope that in future also, Let us organize a not one-off activity, but a series of activities spread, say, over the next 1 year or so, and come out with something which is tangible. While at the same time, you know, uh, unless, as I think this point was mentioned, that soft power should become a strategic asset. So it must get sort of into our foreign policy and quite openly. I was very happy to see last year the JSXP had sent me a book about something about MEA, and it had all the major peace prayers which were mentioned here. And taking a cue from that, we got all those peace prayers here mentioned here. Now, wrote back with a suggestion that if peace prayers are important, then why don't we put it in on your, literature or on your stationery, or why don't we start with the peace prayer? Now, is that too radical an idea that the Indian official functions should start with a peace prayer, a simple peace prayer? Now, we say a lot, but when we actually will be adopted, like we started with a peace prayer in the morning here. So I think there are many ideas like that we need to, and we have to first overcome our own hesitations. As Prime Minister has been talking about hesitations of history, I think our hesitations of culture also we have to. So first we have to come face to face with this. And Dr. Ashok Pradhan, he and I have been discussing this idea of a dictionary, Sanskrit to English dictionary. This idea we have discussed in a slightly wider group also, and I've written to the two ministers concerned with this, and I've spoken to Gurumurthy ji also this morning, and we'll see whether it's just a question of about 6 or 7 crore rupees. A team of people who can work out or rather update a Monier Williams dictionary, which was written about 100 years ago, perhaps, or maybe more, and which is totally outdated and which is actually mischievous also in many ways. And it has to be written by Indians. And how is it that this 7 crore rupees cannot come out of this government? I mean, think ICCR itself can probably take that thing. So I think we should break it into some simple, doable, visible projects and start showing results. So I think this is the idea of this thing, and certainly we would in the VIF will see how these ideas we can take forward. If nothing else, we will start having periodic roundtables and maybe technical workshops, etc., to flesh out these ideas further. So with that, I thank you very much, and I think we have got great cooperation from everyone. I don't want to name everyone because it will take a long time. Now I hand over to Prerna.
Just a minute.
Yeah, sure. Oh,
The CD on Sarv Dharm Pro.
thank you.
Can you see? You will find it.
Thank you so much.
It takes up Dharm.
Okay, before we close, I have an announcement. We have a panel discussion to commemorate Swami Vivekananda's birth anniversary post-lunch today. We would be very grateful if you could spare more time and join us for that event also. Swami Vivekananda's, it's a post-lunch. It's supposed to start at 3:15 or so. Thank you so much. Now the lunch is served at the ground floor.
I don't know. I can't understand. Yeah.